Welcome once again to MSP Confidential. It's Friday and it's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. It means it's time to delve into one more episode of this lovely little podcast that we started just over a year ago. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Jim Smith, CEO of Proper Sky. Jim, welcome to the live stream. It's so good to have you and thanks for coming on, man.
Lewis, thanks for inviting me, man. I'm glad to be here today.
Absolutely a pleasure. Well, a few weeks ago, I had Katherine Gray on, and one of the things I do afterwards is I kind of say, "Hey, thanks for coming on. And did you have anybody you think would be great to come on the live stream?" And she actually recommended you. And I love the email exchange because your response was like, "Well, if Catherine says I got to do it, I got to do it." And so here we are, and we've been talking a little bit backstage about things that are top of mind, things that are kind of happening in your world at the moment. And you mentioned EOS, and EOS has been so popular in the last few years across so many different conversations I've had with MSPs. One of the things you talked about was you decided finally to bring in an EOS implementer into help you guys refine the process and do all that. Maybe I thought we could start there and let you talk a bit about, what was happening before that led you down the path to EOS, and how has the implementation process really helped you get a little bit more crisp in your process internally?
Yeah, so for us, the EOS journey actually started with, I want to say, the guys from Breakage. So Eric and Larry, we went down when Breakage was kind of getting started before they got acquired by ConnectWise. They invited us down and they were like, "Oh yeah, do you guys follow a framework?" And we're kind of building BrightGauge, this like secondary component on the back of it, which is called EOS Attraction. And that was my first experience with it. And I was said, "You'll have to forgive me. I'm a bit of a cold here. So if I touch my nose or sniffle, just bear with me." But anyway, we went down there. I came back. I read the book from Gino Wickman. I listened to the audio book, and I was like, "Oh, I get it. This is great. It's a way to run meetings." So that's kind of how we started it. And we kind of took some of the pieces, the level 10, the sort of long-term vision, and we kind of, we looked at what an implementer cost. And at the time, we were so small, we really couldn't implement it the way that we wanted to. And so we self-implemented. But one of the things that I think really that the EOS framework gave us is, it's so easy to get caught up in the humdrum of the day to day, right? And so when you're thinking like, "Oh, what's it going to look like a year from now? What's it going to look like 3 years from now, 10 years from now?" It really gives you like a framework to really, regardless of the size of your organization or what you want your life to look and feel like, it gives you a way to kind of structure everything.
Mm.
And for us, the journey started there, and we've been self-implementing for a long time. And so we didn't even have an annual meeting, and then we did have an annual meeting, and then we started having quarterly meetings. Then we started bringing in all staff meetings, and we slowly but surely implemented over time. We're at the size of an organization now. We've got 24, 25 employees at this point, and it's really important that I think you get to the next level, right? There's a professionalism that comes when you bring an expert into the room that knows how the system's supposed to run, understands the nuance of all these little pieces, and can really sort of adapt to the value of the room. I was talking to my COO about this yesterday at dinner. I think one of the shortcomings when you do self-implementation is, regardless of who's doing the implementation, whether it's the integrator or the visionary, and these are pieces of the EOS system, you have this tendency when another member gives you feedback, you already kind of know 2 or 3 steps down what's going to happen from that. And so you might just discount that feedback, or you might just say, "You know what, why don't we move that to a Q3 goal and whatever." By having an outside implementer that was sort of new to the MSP space and didn't really understand our industry, all feedback was welcome. All feedback was equal. And I think that really gave everybody a flexibility to be more transparent and a bit more open. And I think that really is the value that I saw in this particular experience.
Hmm. Very interesting. Did you find, at 25 people, we often talk about the various inflection points that MSPs go through from a growth perspective, whether it's, the 15-person mark, the 20-person mark, or the 25-person mark. Where did you start to see a bit of the need for EOS creep in more tangibly, I guess, is the best way to frame that.
So it's interesting. When you build your leadership team, once you get to about 22, 23, that leadership team needs to start hiring and developing managers underneath them. And then I think that's when you really need to start expertly implementing the systems, because Now you need messaging to cascade all the way down from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. And I think one of the great things about EOS is like, you may not understand what, you know, adjusted EBITDA is or W-2 multiples or anything like that. But even a technician can understand like, hey, my quarterly goal is I'm going to get my CSAT score up to 95%, or I'm going to implement the new backup software, right? And they may not understand, but that's part of a whole big piece of building a backup and disaster recovery practice, right? And everybody can sort of build a little piece, and it lets you take these giant projects and sort of long range visionary goals and extrapolate them down so that everybody feels involved and that everything kind of cascades up. It really is a beautiful, elegant system, and I like it a lot.
Interesting. Now, I've heard many of the MSPs doing EOS, and in fact, at SkillPad, we do a bit of EOS. Over time, we've also incorporated some of the OKR framework as far as goals and metrics are concerned. There was an interesting sort of inflection point where there was a more crisp need, let's call it that, to have very specific, tangible metric tracking. And the OKR framework, in combination with the structure of the meetings and everything that EOS provides, was an interesting mixture of things down the line. And it's interesting that I've heard various MSPs, that grow to the 20 million, $30 million level, at some point be like, yeah, we're finding we're hitting a bit of this glass ceiling with the KPI piece of EOS, because we're missing sort of a bit of that tangible communication of goals or metrics down to the rest of the teams. And so I found that this interesting OKR mix was an interesting change or nuance to that over time. But EOS is very internally focused, I suppose, is the best way I can describe it. And the topic for today was this idea of IT the proper way, which is a tagline of your company, of course, and how you go to market. And I was curious how you've started to see maybe the shift of how the business presents towards clients, the client-facing value of having had EOS implemented internally. Are you seeing some specific tangible things improving client value, client conversations, and other aspects of that relationship?
It's interesting. Traction is a very approachable subject to a lot of business owners, right? So because it works in all industries, regardless of what your industry is, and it's actually a topic that a lot of times when I'm having discussions with other business owners, like, yeah, I'm struggling. I'm at 15 people. I just can't get to the next level, or I'm at 20, and I'm like, hey, have you heard about Traction? Do you know Gino Wickman? Have you heard this? It's one of my favorite things to give away to clients because there's such a perceived value there, right? For us internally, like I think one of the things, it's interesting that you say it's internally focused. I never really thought about that, but it is 100%, right? So you're sort of building yourself internally to sort of better present externally. And I think some of the things that we've seen is that as we mature operationally, we're able to deliver service to bigger and larger customers that are also operationally mature, right? And so it's, when you have a well flushed out onboarding process, when you have a real flushed out offboarding process, when you have a real strong hiring process, right? When you're hiring to your core values and you're firing to your core values, like a lot of that stuff, your organization starts to reflect what you truly believe and the culture that you want to build, right? And so, IT the proper way, the way that we sort of went to market with this is we see a lot of bad IT out there. A lot of it, right? And so any business owner can read that slogan and immediately they know exactly what we're saying, right? So whether it's the lens that I look through the brand or whether it's with the way that they look through the brand. And so I think all that kind of comes together as a culmination of some of the internal work that we're doing and then sort of, building the people and the processes around delivering exceptional service.
You mentioned a bit of the client maturity. And in a couple of recent conversations, this has come out just a little casually, maybe through the organic nature of the discussion. But we're talking about a big theme right now is returning to a consultative approach, being more strategic in the QBR process, and a number of these things that when you get down to brass tacks and you start to look at, okay, what's the actual implementation roadmap of something more strategic like this looks like, people hit a bit of this brick wall of like, well, Even our clients are not thinking strategically at all. Like most of them are just fighting fires every day. And if they're a smaller business, 15, 20, 30 people, they're kind of no more mature than your average 10-person business because they just kind of grew organically to that level. They haven't really thought about what that next stage of maturity is. And I find it interesting that as IT providers, we kind of find ourselves in a bit of that, no man's land of also guiding the operational growth of a customer that we're servicing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's perhaps the 100 to 150 person businesses that we work with that maybe discount our views entirely because, well, what would a 25 person business have to teach me about running a 150 person business? And I was curious to ask you a bit of, your thoughts or what you've encountered out in the market, in those two separate sides of the spectrum, the larger businesses that maybe discount your views and then the smaller ones that really need your help operationally outside of just IT.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So one of the ways that I approach this sort of discounting, like, sure, I'm a 25 person company, but I'm a 25 person IT department, right? So do you run a 25 person IT department? Because that's what we do all day long, right? So there's an inherent strength of experience that comes when you are focused on one vertical solely, specifically, right? So there is a lot of things I know about IT. I may not know much about selling popcorn. I can't sell shoes, but I know a hell of a lot about cybersecurity and what an operationally mature organization looks like from service ticket level, ITSM, the whole ITIL framework all the way down, right? So there's a lot of value there. And even if I can't speak to running a 150 person organization, I do know what good looks like, right? And I live and breathe it every day. My whole team does, right? We all do, right? And so I will definitely say, though, there is a huge gap between the 150 person company and the 20 person company because the marketplace dictates it. There's no way that you're going to be able to muscle and feel your way up to a 150 person company because whether you're cutting trees or hanging photos or pictures, there's a certain sophistication that has to come with running an organization and being able to get 150 people growing in the same direction or even showing up on time, right? That's totally different than a 12 or 13 person company, right? And so I think one of the things that we really find ourselves or gravitating towards these organizations that are on a structured path for growth and want a partnership with a domain expert, right? And so we're committed to growing along with them and sort of building those relationships. And that's kind of the way that I look at it. I've earned my place in that room, Lewis. So whether they want to hear my opinion or not doesn't matter. But
I think you've articulated it better than any person I've talked to this about it. And this was not a setup question that I had given you time to think about even. Um, but this is a challenge because we have this issue that the MSP industry is comprised of largely accidental business owners, as we call them colloquially, and sometimes being thrown that question or comment in a situation, maybe the client will not ask you that point blank, but they may behave in a way that expresses a bit of that contention for whether you have anything to offer their much bigger business. And so I love how you articulate it because I think it's easy to go in early on in the conversation and state that as a key value driver of why the relationship between your IT provider business and that customer is going to be fruitful for both sides in the long term. So I just love it. I can see already the snippets I'm going to grab out of this conversation to share on LinkedIn later. So thanks for sharing that because I think it's super valuable for a lot of folks to think about. Back to the realm of EOS for a second. You mentioned you had dinner with your COO, and this is an interesting area that I wanted to ask you when the need for a COO in your business became apparent. And this is one of those multiple hats that the owners wear right up until they're maybe 15 people, 18 people around there. But curious for your
yeah.
backstory on that.
So it's interesting. So in IT Nation Evolve, which I'm a big part of, huge proponent of Evolve and the ConnectWise community. They've really helped transform my business. For a very long time, I was probably a lifestyle business, right? And so the idea was like, hey, I'm going to do this for fun and kind of make a little bit of money and then sell, And then one of my peers recommended a book called 10X is easier than 2X. Which is I forget the guy's name, but he's a Google coach and some other stuff. Dan something. Anyway, Dan Sullivan. So I read that book, and there's a chapter in that book called Who Not How, and it's such a fundamental concept. And I was looking at hiring a marketing person. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a junior person. I'm going to learn how to market. I'm going to train this junior person, and then they're going to become the marketer, right? And I thought to myself, yeah, this is brilliant. This is what I'm going to do. So I'll learn all these pieces. And then after I read that book, I was like, okay, what I really need to do is hire somebody to tell me how to market. Like, why the hell am I inserting myself in the middle of this process? Why not spend a little bit more money on somebody that's talented, that can direct and guide me in the direction that I want to go, right? And so I let go of this junior marketer that we had. We brought in a more seasoned person, and immediately the benefits were obvious, right? And I was like, okay, well, if I can do this with the marketing department, why don't I do this to the operations department, right? And it's actually a funny story. I had no intention of hiring a COO at all, right? I was like the boy with his fingers in the dam. You know what I mean? I was just poking holes everywhere. I was running all the meetings, making all the decisions, and I actually 100% was the bottleneck. And I met Janine Sullivan from ConnectWise. She came up to consult with us on some CFO stuff, and she's like, Jim, you really need an integrator. And I was like, I don't have the money for an integrator, and I don't really, but right time, right place. I met my COO, and we just instantly connected. And he's like, listen, man, he's like, you need to give yourself a pay raise. He's like, you're not good at the details. You got to focus on the big picture stuff. You got to be the face of the business. You got to market and communicate, and then let me run these day-to-day operations. And he sold me, and so I couldn't afford him. I hired him anyway. And, now my whole vision is transformed, right? So instead of this being a lifestyle business, I'm building an amazing leadership team. And it's not me that's building this, but this amazing leadership team is gravitating towards me, and we're delivering exceptional service, and we're just really, really growing. And it's just been like one of the most adventurous and fun rides of my life, honestly.
I was attending a live stream earlier this week where, the interviewer, Uncle Marv, was interviewing Henry Tim of Phantom Technology Solutions. And he's like, oh, tell me about your history. And it was a funny moment where he kind of glossed over an entire 15-year history. And, there's this saying of like overnight success takes 10 years or more usually. And I wanted to ask you if you can articulate a bit of how your focus or time horizon shift happened after bringing in your COO, because the hindsight is always interesting. It's like, yeah, as soon as we hired the COO, I became future focused and much more strategic, et cetera. And it sounds like it was like an overnight flip of the switch, but it never really is. And maybe you can speak to a bit of the nuance of that transition.
100%. So I actually started Proper Sky in 2006, and I made the biggest mistake of all, and I tied my boat to one large raft, right? Like one big ship that was crossing the ocean. And from 2006 to 2014, that organization was 95% of my business, right? And so I had picked up all these sort of time and materials relationships at the outset of that, but that organization went out of business, and I went back from 12 employees down to 4, and I hired and I laid off some very, very good people, right? And it was through no fault of their own. I went through one of the most arduous periods of my life, right? And it really beat me up. And so it was like, okay, well, I don't want to get a job. I don't know what else to do. And I sort of struggled, and then I found ConnectWise, and I found, some of the employees are still working with me today. And we kind of, got the pieces of the raft back together, and then sort of got things ship shape. But, one of the things that I realize is, I'm sitting in these rooms with these guys that are, there's some M&A events and some other stuff where these guys are just raising a ton of money for private equity. And, and I'm listening to them. And it's like, okay, there's nothing that this gentleman or this woman is saying that I don't understand or can't conceptually do, right? And instead of being afraid, why don't I lean into it? Why don't I lean into the thing that I'm most uncomfortable with, right? Sort of the obstacle is the way, right? So if I don't understand what, yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. So, why not lean into what this challenge is and become the best version of myself, right? So, we were also talking about this at dinner last night. For me, this journey is not about money, and it's not about power or anything like that. It's really, I'm on a Mario Kart race on Rainbow Road, and I'm just trying to beat my best time every single day. I'm just making the best version of Jim that's going around that track, right? I try to be kinder, more empathetic, better, father, better, whatever. And so, and I think there's no other vehicle like business ownership that can develop you, I think, in a direction like this.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting inflection point that happens in business ownership too, because it's maybe an employee count thing, and maybe it's early on. I find that it happens at different points, but when you realize that you are building the sustainability of other people's families into your business, it's kind of this really, heavy thing to suddenly realize and understand. Okay, what do we do to protect the nest, so to speak, and change that dynamic so that we're giving people, a realizable future, so to speak, inside of the business. And that gets people also thinking about succession plans and other things of that sort. And I'm curious if succession has been something that's been on your mind. I just turned 50 this year, and a lot of things like this are coming up in more conversations with other MSPs that are, my same generation.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, right? So the white beard fools a lot of people. I'm only in my mid 40s, so I got a little bit more time. But my goal is 9 years, right? So um, I love the idea of building an organization that I can sell, but I also love building an organization that I can hand off to a leadership team that can run, and then just collecting it as a stockholder and helping those people enjoy their lives. One of the things. So one of the things we're committed to is we're going to try to acquire another organization in the next year, right? And this is going to be our first acquisition. And, there's probably some private equity money out there that we could raise. We could sell to private equity. We could do these things and sort of join and bolt on. But I want to be able to do this the proper way. There's a lot of business owners out there where succession is far more important than the fiscal output that comes out of this, right? I want to know that my people are taken care of. I want to know that my customers are taken care of. I want to know that you're going to treat this one woman who's been with me for 15 years like my grandmother, like I've been treating her like my grandmother. And I think there's a value to that. And as we sort of and this is, I'm sorry to wax philosophical, but I feel like as we get more and more mechanized with AI, there's this increasing importance to humanize the aspect of what we're doing, right? And that empathy, kindness are really the things that win the day, And so I want to approach things that way, I guess. So in terms of my legacy plan and sort of that sort of stuff, it's not necessarily monetary, but it's sort of the leaving the world a better place, right? It's about a legacy, not necessarily about a sale.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important and incredible sentiment, because I think people do get a little caught up in sort of the gold rush of M&A, to call it something. And then maybe the real reason to do something like that gets lost in the shuffle of, however many emails you get every week from people offering to buy your business. And so it just maybe desensitizes folks to the reality of, like, the people and the business that exists beneath it. So I love that you're thinking about it that way. Speaking of M&A, are you coming across specific challenges, I guess, in your search for that particular good fit? Or what are the things that are kind of top of mind in the M&A conversations for you?
So it's interesting. So we're just really starting our journey, right? So we were just going over my 3-year plan. No, the 10-year vision, right? This is a 10-year vision. So we put this together in, I want to say 2015, and it was like $6 million MSP. So we're going to hit that number way sooner than, whatever the date was on the timeline. And that was sort of like I'm going to retire kind of a plan. Now our 3-year time horizon is to hit a $15 million top line revenue, right? With 2 additional bolt-ons. But we have a little bit more maturing to do, right? So we have to get the leadership team ready, right? We have to get some of the fundamentals built out so that we feel like we're going to do an exceptional job during the acquisition. I mean, things break, that things are bound to happen, that sort of stuff. But we have a little bit more maturity to go before we actually do that. I'm not necessarily worried about finding the right places, because I just feel like there's space in the marketplace for people that want to partner up with an organization like ours, and I'll work my ass off to find them. So
I'll be honest, I don't think you'll have to work too hard. I hear a lot of this sentiment overall, and people kind of, you know, being asked if don't you want to grow and sell your business, and a lot of the knee jerk reaction is like, well, I didn't start a business to sell it necessarily. Yeah, I suppose that'd be a great outcome if it came to bear, but the reality is like, you know, I love the work that I do. I love the relationships I have with my customers, and so I honestly I don't think you'll be challenged in finding a good fit there, and I continue to see a lot of focus from MSPs on finding the right clients and partnering with people that they care to do business with and not necessarily just for the sake of the dollar. And that is definitely the trend that I'm seeing ongoing. I'm not sure if you experience this or if
Oh,
that's part of your
100%.
sales process too.
Yeah, it's an operational maturity thing, right? So, like I have to keep the lights on and the doors open, right? And sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes we do a great job, or we underbid, or whatever. You know, like I think finding those organizations where you really are driving value, I mean, you talked about this a little bit earlier. The days of support being a differentiator, or a project team, or knowing a particular technology, those days are gone. Those days are gone, right? What I want is, I want the relationship I have with my accountant. They know everything about me, right? They understand the bumps, the warts, the bruises, and all of it. I want to be able to call that person up and have a full,
Disclosure,
in-depth
yeah.
personal conversation about, my organizational health, what we can afford, what we can do, what we can't do. And then I want to work with people like that. I want like-minded organizations that one of the things that one of the things that I do, I don't know if I told you this, but I was in the Peace Corps for a couple of years. And so I cut my teeth back in the mid 2000s helping out some nonprofits, and I find it really spiritually rewarding, right? Like I just like helping good organizations. And I chose not to be a nonprofit because I felt that there was value in learning what some of these large organizations are doing and helping some of these other nonprofits, whether I'm serving on a board or just as an advisor, and teaching them some of these best practices and small things that can really implement and change an organization. And so that's kind of the way, it's that go-giver mentality, right? Like just making it win-win all the way across the table for everybody.
Yeah. Well, my list of books here that you've dropped into the casual conversation continues to grow. I've got 10X is easier than 2X. I've got Obstacle is the Way. I've got The Go Giver now. And so expect those in
E-Myth
the
Rehit,
summary.
right? Yeah, don't
Yeah,
forget
the
Michael
E-Myth
Gerber.
Revisited. Yeah, yeah. I think that Go Giver mentality is an interesting thing. I spent some time in BNI in the early days of trying to figure out how to run an IT business and trying to find new business and stuff like that. And I truly got behind the concept of give without the expectation of reward very early in my career. And I think that has informed a lot of how I, as a person, go to market, so to speak. And and it's so frustrating, I guess, in the beginning to not see if you're looking for the payoff. I suppose it's frustrating. And so in business, that could obviously come to bear as like, well, we're making all these investments in marketing, or we're making all these investments in things like the right process or the right people, and nothing is changing on the top line revenue or the bottom line or whatever other metric that you're trying to use to gauge whether the effort has been worth the squeeze. And so I'm curious to ask you specifically on the sales and marketing thing because, to the IT, the proper way slogan, you guys recently went through a big rebrand. And you mentioned having brought in an expert marketing person to teach you how to do things as opposed to the other way around. And I wanted to ask you about the nuance of coming to terms with the consistency or the patience with the results. There's an expression that I use quite often: impatience with action, patience with results. And I'm curious if A, that hits a note for you, and B, what your experience has been with through the sales and marketing process.
It's interesting, right? So, like every business, you try to keep costs, you try to maintain your costs, right? So you can't throw infinite amounts of money at every single problem, right? So we started with a firm in the Philippines, which we were able to afford relatively inexpensively, and they really helped us collect a bunch of feedback from our customers and like what was good about us, what did our customers find, like what are key themes that were sort of overarching, in the interactions from the service desk, the finance department to the sales department, like what are the things that made us, right? And so out of that, we kind of came out with some of our core values and sort of where we wanted the organization to head, right? Like, what's our mission? Where are we going? And that was really good. And that gave us enough of a framework to sort of like, okay, we understand what our core values are. We understand what differentiates us in the marketplace based on our customer feedback. But I didn't really trust the design elements and some of the other challenges. And so we took that piece and then we went and said, all right, well, let's build the brand, right? So what these are the concepts we're trying to encapsulate in an image and an emotion. What does this feel like? So I had a buddy, Ben. He's a great dude. He's been a customer for 15 years, really good guy. He went back and he's like, Jim, he's like, I think you're putting a little bit of the cart before the horse. He gave us some feedback, connected us with a logo designer, but he said, I think what you really need is some clarity around your messaging. And so we brought in a guy named Zach Messler, another fantastic guy, excellent resource. And we paid for a full day of just like, what does IT look and feel like for you? What does it feel like for your customers? Like how do we take these pieces and differentiate? Like, what does an owner feel like? And it seemed kind of tumultuous, but when it was all said and done, like as soon as we heard IT the proper way, I was like, that's it. That's exactly what this is. Right? We do IT the proper way. Right. And it just really like, it took all of these emotions and the feeling of the owner and then the struggle of explaining the differentiators. And it really just put everything together. When we had that piece, then we went back to the logo designer. We're like, okay, listen, this is the legacy. This is where the brand came from. This is how we want people to feel. This is what we want people to see and read and emote. And I think taking little pieces of some of the best actions, and this is what we work together with marketing. Andrea's my marketing person. She did a bang up job, killer job. And it was a lot of work and going back to the table over and over again. But the output, I mean, I still I'm so proud of the work and what it represents every time I see it. And it's just, I don't think IT companies understand the importance of the value of the brand and the power of what that identity represents and how it makes people feel, I think that's one of our differentiators, right? I think it's really important.
Yeah. This is maybe an abstract tangent to go on or question to ask, but having come from back when you had to go back to a 4-person business, a lot of the things that early IT companies do, and a lot of shops start as the 2-3-person shops, of course, as you know. And so the brand is the individual to a large extent. And I'm curious to ask you about that, making the brand a collective of all your people and not just about the individual brand that you may have been carrying thus far anymore. I wonder if there was an inflection point around that at all. It just kind of struck me as interesting.
I'm actually going through this right now. We just lost a long-term customer, a guy that's been with us for a very long time, right? Great customer, paid his bills on time. We have a really good working relationship. And I am not doing any of the technical work anymore. And access to me has become restricted because I have other things going on, right? And I can feel the tension of this sort of legacy customer and the Proper Sky brand, right? So for him, I am Proper Sky, right? But for the future of Proper Sky, I need customers to look at my whole team, right? I am not the best project engineer. I am not the best person to do accounting. I have a whole team that's built at delivering exceptional service, right? And so it may be a bit more bureaucratic and administrative because you can't go straight to the boss anymore, but you'll get a better outcome, right? And so when we were having this conversation, it occurred to me, I was like, this is part of growing up. This is the pain of adolescence and letting go of the past and building an organization that's not just Jim Smith, right? It's Proper Sky, right? And so when everybody dons these little T-shirts here and puts on their Patagonias, there's a feeling that comes with that, right? Like I'm proud of this and I represent this organization. And from the bottom to the top, it's not just Jim Smith's company anymore. We're Proper Sky. And I think, I'm in the midst of this right now, Louis. It's a challenge, and it's hard to say goodbye to the past sometimes, but I think it's a necessary cost for growth.
Maybe on the flip side of that, what has it been like experiencing or seeing your team step into that brand accountability or that brand promise to some extent? Because I think that's a fascinating process of like when people really start to see, I love the company I work for. I love the work that we do for our people. I am like so aligned with the thing I deliver every day and the impact that it has. Tell me a bit about that experience, from your view as CEO.
So it's interesting. So it's a relatively new brand, and we were 9 employees a year and a half ago. Well, maybe 18 months ago. So we've almost doubled in about 18 months, which for us that's a significant amount of growth, right? So there's been a lot of like, how do we maintain this consistency? And I think this comes back to understanding who and what you are at your core, right? What a lot of people don't realize is that most people get into IT because they like helping people first, and technology is their language, right? And so we really look for people that are empathetic and caring and want to help, and then the technology piece sort of falls into their lap, you know. And I think, you know, just having four words on a wall doesn't necessarily make it core value, right? But it's you know, giving the technician a pat on the back saying you really handled that well, right? And you know what, that was a very hard call and you did a good job. And like reinforcing the behaviors as an executive, I think it's very easy to criticize the bad behaviors, and it's very difficult to praise the good ones. And so I find myself spending more and more time reinforcing the positive interactions, which happen 98% of the time, and less focusing on the negative things. We'll fix the bad things, but let's talk about what went really well and what you're good at, you know. And I think that is ultimately what cultivates a culture of oneness.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like mentorship just overall, whether it's inside the business, outside the business. In fact, Catherine referred to you as a really important mentor in her life. And I'm curious to ask you the same question. What has mentorship meant to you? Who has been a great mentor to you? And what have you learned about the mentorship process in terms of what it delivers for people and ultimately, their goals and everything else?
Um, so this is a relative, you know, I've been so self-absorbed for a long time, right? Honestly, I wish I could say that I wasn't, right? But I think as an owner, you kind of get trapped in your head, right? And Lewis, you understand this. Like, you know, business owners use it's such a trite comment. I hate to say it, but like, oh, you're worried about your employees and making payroll. I mean, there's a period of time that goes on, and like it really does have a value, right? And it creates this, you know, understated sort of language twixt owners. But in terms of mentorship, one of the things I've recently learned is like, you know, if you hire the right people, empower them to make the decisions, and be you know, pat them on the back when they make the good ones, and then sort of remind them that mistakes aren't the end of the world. Nobody died, you know, and it's okay. It's more important that you get back on your horse than anything else, right? And so, you know, and I kind of look at mentorship as like, you know, that piece, you know. And younger me, you know, I had a couple of people that have come in this organization and have moved on, and, you know, like high performers, excellent people. And, you know, I used to be so bitter, like, oh, why wouldn't they leave? But you know what? Sometimes the journey, it ends here for them because this is the most that I can give them, you know? And then maybe someday I'll be big enough that they can come back and that there'll be a new home and a new journey or path for them. Right. And so I look at mentorship as like, it's that Mario Kart race, right? It's like, are you doing the best version of you today that you can give today, right? Are you pushing yourself a little bit harder? You know, one of our core values is curiosity, right? And we use curiosity because it's like, how much further can I push this, or how much more can I get out of this? Like, be curious, you know, understand that like the answer is just on the other side of that discomfort sometimes, right? And if you're willing to get curious and take a risk, you know, I got you if you fall, but I'm glad to see you try, you know. And that's mentorship. For me internally, I am a book junkie. Marty Stockman, and every time we bump into each other, we're you know, shifting books all the time. And I find tremendous fulfillment in audiobooks and just you know, self-learning that way. I'd also say that my peer group in my Evolve group has been probably the most impactful group of people that I've ever had in my life, you know. So it's 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 so important to be able to have somebody to have a drink with, or to call you to the table when you're being a jerk, or that just gives you that nugget of wisdom or a way of looking at something that you just never really considered. And
Mm.
so I find that to be really, really fulfilling.
Yeah, the peer groups are so powerful. Speaking of books, maybe I'll take the liberty here of dropping one of my own, because you spoke to the mentorship piece and the importance of letting people make mistakes. Nobody died, kind of thing. Can you get back on the horse? And it reminded me of this book I've been reading called Principles by Ray Dalio. And this may already be on your list, or you may have already gotten to it. In this book, Ray Dalio, who is the founder and CEO of Bridgewater, a big financial investment company, he went through a few different phases of the business literally crumbling and being built back up. And through the process of rebuilding, he kind of started operating around this idea of principles that are the guiding light of how decisions are made inside the business. And then they get to this interesting conversation in the book where he's talking about how to deal with when mistakes have been made. And one of the things that he talked about was, when a trader had maybe pushed the wrong button or done a wrong trade or lost the company some money, that the carrot of the punishment almost never worked. And so what was interesting is they redefined the entire process of making mistakes into a mistake logging system of sorts, where the punishment would come if you failed to report that a mistake had been made. And so it was more important to call it out so that management could see, okay, what was the mistake that was made? How can we prevent this mistake from being made again? And that came with no punishment, of course. I mean, the scales, right?
Right.
But it was a very different approach than just immediately punishing the behavior without, because the reality is when people make mistakes, and I see this happening a lot in IT, they may not volunteer that they just made a mistake. It gets swept under the rug, and there's fear for repercussion, and maybe that goes undealt with, and then that ultimately deals in a lost client or lost data or something more dire in that situation. So I thought that was cool, and so I'll send you the link to the book because I think you'd actually really enjoy it from a framework perspective. He talks about all these little parts of the business. A lot of the things he talks about was radical candor, radical transparency, and I think that was a really important part of how he built the system. At the same time, his candor and transparency rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because, with client relationships, you talk about that longtime customer that for whom you were the brand, you were Proper Sky. I think the people that get used to communicating a certain way may not understand how the transparency or candor of what they're saying may affect a new person to the relationship. And this is kind of the interesting thing to manage as you get older, to continue being able to be a chameleon for those that are new to a relationship with you, new to a relationship with the business, and so on. So anyways, fascinating book. I kind of went on my
Yeah.
little soapbox there for a minute, but that's called
No, it's cool, man. I'm into it.
Principles
Yeah.
by Ray
So I
Dalio.
love, yeah, love it.
Let me get back into a bit of the challenge of the the goal that is success, because different conversations yield a slightly different maybe tainting on the glass, so to speak. For some people, success is bottom line. For some people, success is that their clients are growing. For some people, success is that their people are happy. And I'm curious how you define success today, or how you've seen success, the definition of success changing over the big inflection points of the business.
It's interesting. So, from a revenue standpoint, how does PE put their pants on one leg at a time, right? Just like I do. So, if I'm going to go for 5 million, why not go for 5 million, right? So, I think there's more opportunity for growth and development there. I feel like that's kind of grown up a little bit more as I've acclimated to my tolerance for risk, my understanding of my capabilities, and a team that can excel and perform, right? And I think that's natural as you get larger, right? You kind of get a bigger appetite. For me, I have always measured success as the ability to control my calendar, right? So the one resource that we do not have more of is time, right? And so that is such a limited commodity to me. And so I would trade, so much of my wealth for additional time, just because there's so much that you can eke out of this world. There's so much good that life has to offer, travel and time with children and your wife and friends and laughing. And there's just so much goodness. And so I've always measured my flexibility of calendar as my biggest win as an entrepreneur, right? And so there were sacrifices made for many, many years to get to the point that I'm at now. But there are days when I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to go for a run. It's 10:30 in the morning, and I hop on the call or I check my Outlook then, right? And for me, that's a W, right? That goes right in the bucket. And one of the other things too is as you know, I've been very fortunate. My wife has been incredibly successful as well. So, and that's afforded us like the ability to travel and see the world with our kids and sort of experience some of like just amazing Earth. It's just an amazing place. And I think I've been blessed many times over as a result of that.
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, if I was going to summarize, I guess time and flexibility, right?
Have you felt the peer pressure of the grind to any extent? You know, because I think we're definitely sort of in that work ethic culture, and I often have arguments about the definition of work ethic because most people would just define it as the long hours and the grind until the job is done. Do you ever feel the pressure of that to any extent, or are you finding that you're letting it unravel now over time slowly?
That's a good question. So there's peaks and valleys, right? Like everything else. And I think the CEO of American Express said, you juggle five balls in your life, right? And it's like, spirit, health, family, career, and yeah, maybe it's four. It's like, career is the one you can drop, right? But if you're not taking care of your spirit, you're not taking care of your family, you're not taking care of your health, um, you're gonna pay a consequence for that, right? And there's no such thing as balance. There's always the juggle, right? And so for me, some weeks the juggle teeters more career, and some weeks it teeters more the health, right? And I think you got to just kind of play that game where you're just constantly
Mm.
juggling and keeping these balls in the air to the best of your ability, right? So, um, you know, fiscal success, it's not about the hours that you put in. I mean, there's definitely a correlation, right? Hey, you want to be a great guitarist, 10,000 hours or whatever the heck the book is, Malcolm Gladwell's book, right? Um, but I don't necessarily think that has to be the case in the business, right? So you might forego a little bit of profit, have to hire a couple more people and spread the roll out a little bit, but there's success and there's money to be made if you do it right.
Yeah, I think a lot more lately, increasingly, as I age, about that gray area. I guess you could call it the juggle or the gray area, and because I find that many of my conversations are tinged by this idea of like absolutism. People are either on one side of an issue or the other side of an issue. I guess politics are the perfect example of this, of just how divisive it could be when people just need to be on one side or the other side of an issue. And I think this just happens in life naturally. It's maybe part of the human condition where people kind of are one way about things or another way. And I'm curious if you have sort of detected yourself being more comfortable in that gray area. And in fact, one of the things that may prompt you or compel you to go read that Ray Dalio book is he has this whole concept in the book about struggling well. This idea that it's okay to be struggling, and it's just interesting to learn how to struggle well because that's what kind of life is about, really. But the gray area, your comment on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, not to dive into politics, right? But I think what happens, I think if you asked or polled most Americans, right, somewhere on the spectrum, they might be, socially conservative or socially liberal, fiscally conservative or fiscally liberal, right? And there's so much nuance that happens in that spectrum that the crazy screaming voices at the ends of them drown out any space for compromise. And what life is, it's a series of compromises, right? So that every day you wake up, you make a decision. Am I going to go to my daughter's ballet show? Or am I going to get this project done because I promised it would be done by 12 o'clock, right? And so as you make these decisions day by day, your life fills out and becomes a series of the repercussions of those decisions, right? And so I think each day in that gray area, you got to figure out what's the best decision you can make for that day, right? And then you live life and you just kind of hold on and be grateful.
Yeah, truly. Well, I'm grateful that today's decision for you was to come on MSP Confidential and have a little chat about all these interesting topics and things that maybe are ruminating. And so I want to thank you because it's been enlightening. I love the recommendation on the books. I think that's a great piece to continue the conversation about. Now I know the things I need to go read so I can engage you in further conversation on some of these topics. Kudos to your success. I think I very much align with many of the things you said around the balance, enjoying what you're doing, the four ball juggle example is so apropos because it's true. We spend so much time kind of hyper focused on the one thing, only then to the old adage of the you trade time for money, and then later you're trying to buy the time back with the money. And so, where is the good place, and have you enjoyed your life at all throughout the process? So these are questions that I think I wish we could ask them earlier in our life spectrum, because it feels like it's only at a certain point that this starts to become an issue. But so
Yeah.
insightful.
Yeah.
So, Jim, I think that brings us to a close for today's conversation. I'd love to continue this. There's so many little tidbits that I took notes on. I've got a whole little note here with ideas and topics that maybe we'll explore on a second visit. To check in with you and see how that EOS implementation has been going, see how the growth is happening for you, and maybe you've acquired that other business by then. And so, wish you the best of luck with all that. And so, thank you once again for joining me today on MSP Confidential.
Lewis, thank you so much, man. This is really a great conversation, and I'll talk about this all day, every day. I love it. Right. So this is what we do.
Right on. Well, thanks, folks, for joining us. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern for MSP Confidential. Come hang out with us. Like and subscribe on YouTube is where all the previous episodes are located. Yeah, wherever that button is. And drop us a comment. Did you have a question about something we talked about today? Do you want to continue the conversation? I think LinkedIn is a perfect place to do that, or even on the YouTube comments. So jump in, have the conversation. And thanks for joining us. And until next time, thank you so much. And thanks, Jim,